Howdy and welcome to Bamberger Ranch. My name is Aldo Leopold. I'm the director of the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, and we're going to continue our Leopold Live series here at Bamberger, continuing to talk about the 5 basic tools introduced by Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife management. These 5 tools include cow, axe, plow, fire, and gun. And what we hope to do in the upcoming months is show you how those tools can be applied, but with very specific projects and objectives. And so with me is Dr. April Sampson. She's the executive director of Bamberger, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Bamberger and what we hope to cover in the series.
Great. Thank you so much, Roel. We're really excited to have you and your colleagues from the Natural Resources Institute back here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve. And we're excited about continuing our journey into Leopold Live version 2. Like Roel said, we'll be providing more detail and more useful information regarding the 5 tools that Aldo Leopold championed. Here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is landowner stewardship, outreach, and environmental education. So we have many Central Texas school children that come visit us every year for hands-on science-based environmental education lessons, and we also lead showcase tours and workshops for landowners interested in practicing restoration and good land stewardship. So we're very happy to be partnering with Natural Resources Institute, and we know that you'll benefit a lot from the information that we are going to be talking about during this new version of Leopold Live.
So let's go ahead and get started.
Great.
Hello again, I'm Steve Fulton. Thank you, April. Thank you, Roel. We're out here again for another section of Leopold Live, really concentrating on the wildlife valuation. Now, one of the things you can do to qualify for that valuation is supplemental feeding. It is something that we do take part of here on the Bamberger Ranch. Mainly our concentration is the feeding and management of the white-tailed deer, but of course, we all have bird feeders at our house because we love to see those animals quite a bit closer than out there hiding in the bushes. So what I have behind me is a number of feeder types that we use here on the Bamberger Ranch. Before we get to the actual feeders, things to discuss or to think about anytime you're beginning a feeding program. And we'll go over the negatives first, and that way we can end on a good light, on the good side. One of the biggest things to be concerned about anytime you're feeding wildlife is feeding of non-target species. Okay, here in the hill country, our 2 main non-target species when we're feeding white-tailed deer are going to be feral hogs, which are an invasive exotic species that does a lot of damage throughout the state of Texas, not just the hill country. And then, excuse me, and then also raccoons. Now, they're very cute animals, but just like with management of anything, whether it's management of plants, animals, insects, you have too much of one thing, it can become a problem. And a big problem with raccoons is you'll have diseases like distemper. You'll have rabies that can run rampant through populations of those mesomammals like raccoons, especially if there's too many of them. So you really want to be cognizant of if you're putting a feed source out there, and the raccoon's going to eat anything you put out there because they're omnivores, right? So they're going to eat your feed. So just be cognizant of that. If it needs be, you might have to control populations of raccoons or other mesomammals that are eating that feed. Again, just keeping good surveys, knowing what you have out there. Now, one way that we prevent the feeding of feral hogs is around our feeders. We put up a pen It's a circular enclosure. It's about 30-foot diameter. We use what's called hog paneling. It's a thick wired, basically a type of fencing that you can buy at Tractor Supply or Home Depot or wherever you get your farm and ranch supply at. About 30 feet. It needs to be big enough where the deer will feel comfortable jumping in. So 30-foot diameter is a minimum. And that hog paneling is 32 inches high. Anything lower than that, the pigs will go over it and get in the pen. But so far on the ranch, we've found very few instances where the feral hogs have gotten inside our feeder enclosures. So that's an easy way to take care of that problem. And also, as when I show you some of these feeders will sling the bait that you're using during hunting season to attract the animals. They will sling that bait outside that 30-foot pen to go ahead to attract those feral hogs while you're sitting there with a rifle to harvest your deer. Pigs show up. Hey, let's get rid of that invasive exotic species right there. Just take one out, take it home, dress it up, eat it. They're pretty good eating. So in addition to using mechanical feeders to either feed a bait or a protein supplement, like I will show you in just a few minutes, food plots are another option. However, I find that food plots are not as effective at getting that animal to that size, whether you're increasing the health of the animal and trying to get the body size up or the antler size, whatever your goal is. As far as a supplement, a food plot, when a food plot is really needed, is when we're in a drought condition. Well, unless you're able to irrigate that food plot, guess what? Your food plot's not going to grow. So you're still not going to have that food source available for your deer. Now in good times, when there's enough rain for your food plot to grow, guess what? Our native forage is top notch. So the deer really don't need the food plot. So the food plot that we're standing in right here has been planted not for deer, it's been planted for birds. So I've planted stuff like, it's got paradovic sunflower in it, it's got iron and clay pea, which are both some small seeds that the birds will utilize. It's also got brown top millet, again, a seed producing plant that can help feed the birds in late summer and early fall. Now moving to the feeders. I think especially anybody that's a deer hunter, they know about the typical slinging corn feeder, right? So it has a timer on it. You set it to go off at a certain time in the evening, a certain time in the morning, and it slings out a predetermined amount of feed. In the case of corn, that's a bait. So that does very little as far as nutritional value for the animal. Think of corn as being a soda water or soda pop for a kid. I mean, they love it. That's why they come for it, right? The kids are going to drive you crazy for that soda water. Well, that's what corn is for a deer or a pig or anything else eating it. It's total sugar. It's almost 100% carbohydrate. Tastes good, does very little for their overall health. So we use that as a bait just to attract the animals, so it makes it easier for us to harvest the numbers that we need to harvest. In the hill country, that number is always high because we have a lot of deer. So anything that can help us as managers to achieve that harvest rate and make it a little easier, hey, that's good. So that's this typical sling feeder. I'll hit the test button on it real quick just to show you how far it slings. Okay. All of my feeders I have set up on a 12-volt system. They seem to be a little hardier system. All of my feeders that have a battery that operates them, you will also see a solar panel on it. Again, that helps to maintain the feeder. Anything that can reduce my maintenance efforts when I have 5,500 acres and 25 deer feeders to look at all during deer season. Anything to help out with that maintenance is the way to go. So that's a typical just a rotating sling feeder. And again, If you could see the kernels, this is put out probably a diameter of about 40 to 45 feet of corn from one side of the area to the other. Another benefit to having a larger pattern to your bait is how many deer you can have in that area. So you're just imagine you're sitting there, you're in the blind, you're waiting for the deer to come up to harvest. Maybe you're after a particular deer. Maybe it's not the dominant buck, but there's a dominant buck there. Well, if you have a larger area, that dominant buck can be on one side, and that inferior, younger animal that's a cull can be on the other side, and the dominant buck won't run it off. So it gives you more of an opportunity to harvest that animal and get that genetic out of the pool of animals that you have. Another feeder that we use here that can also be used to feed other wildlife, such as fish. This feeder is a directional sling feeder, so it slings the corn out or the fish food in one direction. So you can set this feeder up on the side of a pond that you have catfish stocked in it or whatever, and it can be. Then you can feed those fish. It's going to take me just a second to get this one to sling. Now, obviously, anytime when you're operating feeders like this and you're testing them, you want to try to remove yourself from the immediate area, because that corn, it hurts, and if it hits you in the eye, it could potentially do some damage. So you probably can't see it in the view of the camera, but this is slinging corn probably upwards of 50 feet in one direction. So again, it's got a large distribution of that bait. So again, you can have multiple deer, even mature bucks in that area where you can take your pick, right? Or it goes far enough out in the pond where you're feeding a larger surface area of that pond, so you can feed more fish during a feeding cycle. Okay, so the two feeders that I've showed you so far are better used for baiting deer, and corn is what they're designed really to broadcast. If you put protein pellets in, like as what we use for supplement for the deer throughout the off season, throughout the spring and summer, the orifice on these feeders is really not big enough. So what will happen is that protein pellet will get clogged up in there, and it won't no longer function. You can use that, and also these don't really put out enough to provide enough supplement for those animals. So moving on to what we use to actually supplement their diet, that's actually nutritionally valuable for the animals. We use a free choice, gravity fed, what we call a protein feeder, and what we put in it is a protein pellet. This is a 20% protein pellet. You'll have to get some B-roll. And this again, this is going to help the animals gain a more mature body size and antler size at a younger age, which means over time, as they age, they'll just continue to get bigger and bigger as far as antler size. But as far as their body size, they'll mature a lot more quickly. And that way they can put the total of those resources, those protein resources, towards antler growth. Again, it's a choice that we make to supplemental feed. You do not have to supplemental feed your animals, okay? It does qualify you for the valuation, for the wildlife valuation, but you don't have to supplemental feed your white-tailed deer. Food plots for birds also qualifies for you. Okay, we choose it, and it's an economic decision on our part because we can grow larger antlered bucks, which means for the hunters that we have out, they're willing to pay more money for it. So again, it's an economic choice that we make, but it puts a lot more weight on our shoulders as managers to make sure that we keep those populations of, say, raccoons in check. If they get too numerous, they get out of balance, you have things that happen that are just not as appealing, like a raccoon that has died right next to your walking trail when you have a group of people. That's the things we don't want to see, okay? So this free choice feeder, it works great for the deer because the deer can come through and eat as much as they want. Now for white-tailed deer, that's not much. They're not, some of our exotics will actually come up here and they will actually fill their bellies full, which is not what we want to do. We're not trying to target the exotic species, the exotic deer species, but how do you keep the exotic deer out when you have them? You can't fence them out because then you're fencing out the whitetail deer that's trying to feed. So you just got to deal with that. The only way to control that is to cull out the exotics as best you can, which is what we do here. We have one more feeder type that we're beginning to use here on the Bamberger Ranch. I have one here that I got secondhand. Hopefully the budget will allow me to buy some new ones in the future. But as secondhand, it still works just fine. This is it's a free choice feeder, but it's also timed. So it has a timer and a sling motor like the corn feeders have, but it dispenses the feed in this trough down at the bottom where the deer can come up and eat it at their leisure. They don't have to wait for the time. One big benefit to this is that you can set it to go off at the same time as you would your corn feeders, the same time in the evening, the same time in the morning, which helps condition the deer. But also, when you have it going off at a set time, those animals remember that, and they will get up there and eat it all up potentially, and not leave anything for the raccoons. So it's a way to decrease the amount of non-target animal feeding that you're doing. Again, for deer, it's going to be a little different. So I'm going to hit the test button on it so you can kind of see how it works without flipping the trigger over. Okay. Now, all these feeders with the time dispensing, most of them you can set it to go off multiple times a day. Normally, with the corn feeders, I have them set to go off 2 times in the evening, 2 times in the morning. Again, those times of the day when those deer are most active. They do make a variety of feeders for upland game birds, mostly turkey and quail. That are also beneficial for those birds if they're put out in their habitat, especially during drought years when it's hard to find those food resources. But anything you can do to help out the wildlife, and again, this will qualify you for the wildlife valuation. Now let's take a few questions from the audience.
Yes. Stephen, do you have to supplement food all year round or only certain times of the year?
Some of that is county-based as far as your county tax assessor, as far as the wildlife valuation. I will tell you, though, the wildlife valuation was set up to benefit wildlife, and truly the best benefit for wildlife is that spring and especially summer period to have that supplemental feed handy, those drought periods in the summer when it's hard for those deer to really put on the weight and the fat stores that they will need to get through the following winter and the rut cycle. So yes, the feeding should take place year round if you're truly wanting to help out the animals.
Great, thank you. And could you talk a little bit about how many feeders you use per acre, or what area feeder to area ratio do you like?
Okay, well the rule of thumb for supplemental feeding is a feeder to 200 acres. Now that is highly dependent on your topography. A lot of our feeders we have, so as far as supplemental feeders in an area that's about 3,400 acres, I have 20 supplemental feeders, so that's closer to 150 acres per feeder. Okay, and as far as the corn feeders for bait, I have 24 of those, so that's even a smaller number of acreage per feeder. So a lot of it depends on topography. So say you have a ridge with the steep valley and another ridge on the other side. And maybe they're only 300 yards apart, but you got this deep valley in between. It's okay. It's perfectly okay to have a feeder on that ridge line or vice versa. And this valley with the ridge in between and down in that valley, and that would be less than 200 acres that they each be covering. So it's perfectly fine, excuse me, to have more feeders per less acreage.
Great, thank you.
All right, well that was pretty exciting. Thank you for joining our session of Leopold Live. Again, we'd like to thank all those speakers and those that participated with our session. Look for upcoming sessions over the course of the next year, and our hope is to cover these very specific topics that are of interest to landowners and natural resource managers.
That's right. And I'd like to thank once again the Natural Resources Institute for coming out here and helping us provide this valuable information. At Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we hope to have our programming, including our workshops and tours, back up and running by the fall, depending on how things go. So make sure to watch for both the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute and Bamberger Ranch Preserve on your social media channels, and make sure to check in every once in a while and see what we're up to.